All right, folks, we're starting to see people trickle in to this morning's coffee chat. So welcome and good morning. I'll wait just a few more moments before doing the initial welcome, but good to see everyone joining us here. All right. Well, good morning, Snohomish County. This is Gary Clark, President and CEO, Economic Alliance Snohomish County, coming to you with another coffee chat. So I hope you all have your drinks with you and your thinking caps on and ready to take in some great information about life science. So without further ado, I am just going to welcome our moderator and talented person who is going to lead us into the next hour here. But first and foremost, I would like to say that you make sure that you put your information on the chat box, that you provide that information, and please engage us with questions and commentary in the chat box so that Leslie can provide that to our wonderful panel. So without further ado, we welcome moderator Leslie Alexander, President and CEO, Life Science Washington. And last item of note for Leslie is that her last name actually means protector of mankind. So, Leslie,
Whoa.
Take it away.
Wow, I don't know that I've ever had a grander introduction. Gary, thank you so much. And thank you to the Economic Alliance of Snohomish County for holding this session today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to be joined by my three colleagues on the panel who are each going to introduce themselves in a little bit, but Rich Fabian, who not only is the president and CEO of Sonosite, but is the vice chair of the board for Life Science Washington, Nancy Whiting at CGen, who has had so many promotions since I've been here. I can't keep track of the latest title, but Nancy is on the executive committee of our board, our finance committee, and with CGen, thrilled to have you. And Chris, who recently moved from AGC Biologics to take a leadership role with what was formerly Juno and is now part of BMS. I'm grateful to have all of you with me today. And again, really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the amazing life science work that is taking place throughout our region. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Life Science Washington, we are the industry association for the life science sectors throughout the state of Washington. We connect our 500 plus members to each other and to funding, partnerships, talent, and essential business services. We elevate the industry by promoting policies that strengthen the environment for groundbreaking research and product development that improves and saves lives. And we do that in partnership with a lot of organizations, such as the Economic Alliance of Snohomish. So Matt, thank you for the partnership that you have provided in all the years that I have been here. And Gary, welcome to the area. I look forward to meeting you in person. Before getting to my questions, I just wanted to take a few minutes and maybe give you a little bit of a perspective of what is going on right now. I will do less of my traditional statewide perspective and really focus in here in Western Washington. I've been here for 5 years now. And when I think about the environment, when I came here in the life science sector and where we are now, it's really astounding to me how much has transpired during that 5-year period. It did not, however, come from nowhere. It wasn't a totally out of the blue experience. In fact, really, if you think about, just to give you a perspective, there's so many, there are probably 10 or 20 places in the country that really can be considered major clusters for the life science industry sectors. And those sectors include so many things: biotechnology, biomanufacturing, medical devices, medical technology, increasingly digital health and health IT. And we have all of those here in our region. But how does an ecosystem get going? Each one has their own strengths, their own unique things that they grow on. And when I came here, I could see right away that Seattle, and I'll call Seattle, but I mean greater Seattle. Every report you see, there are very few that are just focused on Seattle. You can consider Snohomish County a part of almost all of those. That we have a big R ecosystem, meaning big research. And that's not surprising when you look at the institutions we have in our region. So we not only have University of Washington, Seattle, and its satellite campus in Bothell, but we have dozens of really top-rated private nonprofit research institutes, such as Fred Hutch, such as the Allen Institute, the Institute for Systems Biology. And out of all of these institutions is pouring research that ultimately, much of which has potential to become innovation. So over the years, when you look at that innovation, probably very few of you, I'm guessing, know how many firsts have taken place in the region, and I could do an hour talk on them. So let me just give you 3 or 4 highlights. Out of Fred Hutch came the first autologous bone marrow transplant, successful transplant. From that, decades, that was like 60 years ago, maybe not, maybe 50 years ago. In any event, from that, if you look at our region, it's one of the leading places in the world for immuno-oncology. So you have to take that first bone marrow transplant, think of all the work that has been done since then. Rich is going to tell us about ultrasound. So a lot of you don't know that ultrasound was discovered here. The first defibrillator was made here in Seattle. End-stage renal disease. A lot of you aren't aware that a lot of what has happened in the area of end-stage renal disease is because of a shunt that was created here between 2 researchers that allowed for outpatient dialysis, which literally 3 million people a year are receiving. It's kind of breathtaking when you think about what has transpired here. However, the translation of many of the basic science discoveries beyond research in our area hasn't been happening at full tilt until much more recently. A lot of that research, we've been fortunate if companies were created, and there were some, oh my gosh, in the 10 years before I arrived, there were probably 10 companies that had started. Seagen is probably one of the only ones, Nancy, of that decade or so, from starting in around 1990 through 2000, 2005, where the companies got started, got all the way through FDA approval of their products, and then got acquired. And they got acquired and they moved. And what that meant is we've had incredible research continuing to stimulate companies' creation, but it's only been recently where we have seen that these companies are staying here, they're growing, and even more recently when they were acquired, the acquirers have put down roots and said, this time we're not moving. And that's because of the talent that exists in this region. When I arrived 5 years ago, Amgen had just left the area. It was kind of the last of the big companies going away. And I call it the Amgen Hangover. So what we were seeing then was just that we were kind of in the doldrums, to tell you the truth. And people were feeling like, oh my gosh, if Immunex had been the starting company acquired by Amgen, and Amgen had built a huge campus. And so the expectation was we're finally over the hump. We're on our way. And when we did our strategic plan, the biggest issue that was brought to bear was visibility. Our companies, all those hundreds of companies and research institutes, were not feeling valued in the state, were not feeling seen. We were just kind of, what are we ever going to do to be able to grow? When I look at where we are now, it is absolutely astounding what has taken place in 5 years. So we did our economic impact report 5 years ago. You can find, I'm sorry, did it published it 2.5 years ago. And we looked across the state. And at that time, we had about 1,150 life science companies and research groups throughout the state. And in Snohomish County alone, there are probably now about 200 companies, to give you some perspective. The visibility that has happened, we've been named in the last few years. Greater Seattle, 2 years ago, we were named the fastest growing cluster, life science cluster in the country. Last year, we were identified in the top 10 of the largest and stable clusters. You ask why that has happened. So the measures that are used are things like real estate transactions, how's space going? What's happening with federal funding for research coming into the area? What's happening with venture capital? What are all the ingredients that go into a great ecosystem? And in these past few years, we've seen incredible, mind-blowing growth. And the companies that are part of our panel today are going to be sharing what's going on exactly with theirs. So when you think of those clusters and you think of Bothell, you think of the surrounds, I would say 5 years ago, nobody was paying attention to Bothell. If you were not in Bothell basing your business there, I'm guessing a lot of folks had no idea, and regretfully, maybe even still do not realize what is taking place right in your backyards. We tend to think of that part of Washington, Everett and down as sort of the aerospace cluster of the world. But in fact, if you get off the freeway and you drive into Canyon Park, you might be amazed to see the number of large campuses that are there, as well as buildings that are filled with young startup companies. Space is tight. We know one of the companies that's making it even tighter. Nancy, you'll laugh. I looked up some statistics. I thought it was more recent. When I saw it was 2018, it was looking at CGen having just announced 3 new buildings. And that was back in 2018. And now when people hear what you have to say, I think they're going to realize how fast that growth is taking place. Something that really stimulated a lot of attention to our whole region, of course, has been COVID. It's what has happened with the pandemic. I don't think it made anything that was already on a growth trajectory happen, but it certainly put our region much more on the map, because the amount of projects and research taking place here, starting at the basic science level and all the way through to products, such as the one Rich will describe, some of the med tech companies in your area, and some of the biologics and the new cell therapies that are being created, all have a role to play in tackling COVID. There are probably 80 projects that are taking place, not 80 organizations, because Fred Hutch and UW account for a lot of those. But there's every aspect of COVID, from basic virology, from tracking, looking at AI and machine learning to track what is going on with variants, with mutations, keep track of those, all the way through things like remdesivir. Gilead did not create remdesivir, the monoclonal antibody you're hearing about in all the ads now. They didn't create it here, but they have 200 to 300 researchers in our region continuing to advance this work. So without further ado, I really want to now turn it over, and I'd like to start with Rich. If you could come off mic, Rich, and tell us about yourself and tell us about Sonosite.
Thanks, Leslie, and good morning, everybody. I get greetings from Canyon Park. So that's where Sonosite's located. Nancy, I'm not exactly sure which building you're in, but you know we're right next to a CGen building and surrounded by many of yours. So it's fantastic to be here, and thanks for the shout out, Leslie, for Canyon Park. If anybody wants to drive down here, please don't do it at the beginning or end of the day. That's when things get a little busy in the neighborhood. But it's nice because I get a chance to do two of my favorite things, which is drink coffee and talk about healthcare and share a little bit about my company, which is Fujifilm Sonosite. As many of you know, Sonosite is a true startup. It's a startup that was created right here in Bothell. We often say we were born on the battlefield. In 1998, there was a Department of Defense, it's called a DARPA grant. And the idea was, how do you miniaturize these large ultrasounds that are 300, 400, 500 pounds and bring imaging to the battlefield? That's how point of care ultrasound started. And through this grant, it was actually a part of a previous company called ATL. ATL, as many of you know, was purchased by Philips Healthcare. Sonosite got spun off, and the rest is history. We created the first under 10-pound ultrasound, originally intended for the battlefield. And what's amazing is the fact that when the physicians who are using this in the battlefield started to come back to their hospitals and realized we could use this all throughout the hospital, in emergency rooms, in critical care, in anesthesia, really in all departments, and get an answer immediately instead of having to refer patients and just think of the inefficiencies in healthcare of the traditional ultrasound path. You can get an answer immediately or go for precise needle placement. And any of you who've had a needle placed non-precisely can appreciate how the benefit of getting it right the first time. Something as simple as peripheral IV, which has about a 70% chance of success without guidance, can go up to 99+% with ultrasound guidance. And over the years, we've seen the business grow. Sonosite was acquired in 2012 by Fujifilm. So we're now part of Fujifilm Medical, which is a very large company, really end-to-end medical products. But here locally, we do some, you think of a company that's based in Bothell, just outside of Seattle, and this remains our global headquarters for Sonosite. So we're headquartered here in Canyon Park. We have about 500 employees here. We do everything from end to end. We have product management. We have hundreds of engineers. We do all of our manufacturing locally right here on site. And we have all the support functions for marketing, finance, HR, locally here in Bothell. Leslie, I think later we'll talk about some of the challenges as we kind of talk about, the ecosystem. But I will say that, going from startup to global market leader, we still love, the idea of being a part of, you use the term cluster. It is amazing to see the talent that resides in this area in healthcare, and in particular ultrasound. What I didn't mention earlier, but when I talked about ATL, that company used the technology that was actually created at University of Washington for ultrasound technology. So ultrasound was created right here in the Pacific Northwest. That's why you'll see not only our global headquarters here in Bothell, right across the street, I can see from my office, my old company that I worked for 15 years prior to starting here at Sonosite, Philips Healthcare. They have their global headquarters for ultrasound here as well. Siemens Healthcare has their global headquarters in Issaquah. And there are a lot of smaller companies that have been spun off, and even the ecosystem of technology and research capabilities have been tremendously helpful. An example of that is when we were looking for a partner for artificial intelligence, which is really important in our industry. We partnered right in Seattle with Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence, AI Squared. And they helped us develop some algorithms for artificial intelligence that no one else in the industry has. And we're really excited about that partnership as well. Yeah, that's a quick summary of who I am and what we do. I do want to, I forgot to say thank you to Matt Smith and Gary Clark for the invitation and all the support that we get from the Economic Alliance of Snohomish County. It's really important to us. We appreciate the partnership, and thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks, Rich. Nancy?
Sure, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, and I'm happy and excited to share a little bit about Seagen, who we are and what we do. So I'm going to take just a step back and give you a flavor of what it takes to get a drug approved in the United States and in other countries as well. So, you know, there's a lot of great statistics out there, and I think it's important to kind of just think about it. So across all disease therapies, across all areas, on average, only about 1 in 5 drugs that are tested in people go on to get approved. And in cancer drug development specifically, that number is actually more like 1 in 9. It's a long process from preclinical testing to FDA approval, and it can take between 12 and 15 years for a company to get a drug approved. So, you know, it's costly, it's daunting, and it really takes grit and determination to do this. We at Seagen have had a long journey. We've been in operations coming up on 23 years. We now have 3 drugs approved by the FDA and also approved by other regulatory authorities globally. But our success has really depended on innovation and using our unique technology to carve out a niche to become an industry leader, just like Rich shared that Sonosite has become, to become an industry leader in a specialized field. And our specialized field is called antibody drug conjugates. As I mentioned, we now have 3 drugs approved. We are headquartered in Bothell, Washington, just up the hill from you, Rich. If you're in the Sonosite building, if you turn and look northeast, you'll see building 3 of Seagen that I spend my days in.
I know just where it is. Yep.
Yeah, we have, in addition to Bothell, where our headquarters are, we have 10 other locations, 1 in San Francisco, and then in Canada, Switzerland, and then across Europe. We have over 2,000 employees across the world now, and actually have been publicly traded on NASDAQ for 20 years. So our story briefly is an interesting one. We were incorporated in July 1997 to develop this concept of novel antibody-based cancer therapies. We chose Snohomish County. Our founder, Clay, who's still our CEO today, chose Snohomish County really because it's a great place to work. There was access to lab space at reasonable rates, as well as office space. It's a beautiful setting. You know, I've seen bobcats walk through our office park. We see hawks on a regular basis. And it's a great place for our employees to live. And many of them do live in Snohomish County because of, you know, of course, it, as you all know, provides affordable housing with great amenities. As a company, we were actually a spin out of BristolMyers Squibb, who had acquired a lab here in Seattle, and in 1997 decided that antibodies were never going to be a thing for therapy, for therapeutic to make into drugs. But our founder, Clay, really recognized the promise of these new agents and was able to secure the seed money he needed to spin the technology out of BMS and to build a company around that initial technology. So I think many people will be familiar with the concept of monoclonal antibodies with the talk around the COVID, Regeneron antibody cocktails that have been used. But essentially, monoclonal antibodies are similar to the antibodies that your body produces as part of an immune response to an infection. They're specialized and complex proteins which have the ability to bind other proteins with very high specificity. So they're very specific just for that protein. And when we use these monoclonal antibodies, we can then develop drugs that can be very specifically targeted to proteins. What we've done is take that technology and take it the next step. So essentially, what we do is we create antibody drug conjugates, or ADCs, and that's the technology that we are a market leader in. And what ADCs do is they take monoclonal antibodies to the next level. So we use a monoclonal antibody that's that's designed to bind specifically to a protein found on the surface of a cancer cell. Then we take a very highly potent chemotherapy drug, one that would be too toxic by itself to give directly to patients through an IV, and we chemically connect the chemotherapy to the antibody via a linker. And it's the linker, this third part, that is really important, and where a lot of our advances have come from, because it needs to be really stable so the highly potent chemo doesn't fall off in the bloodstream, but it also has to be specifically cleavable so that it can be released once the construct binds the cancer cell and gets inside the cell, so that the chemotherapy can be released just inside the cancer cell, and thus we sort of kill the cancer cell from the inside out. So we're a pioneer in this technology. We now have 3 products approved, one for a type of multiple types of lymphomas, a type of blood cancer, another for a type of bladder cancer. And we have a third product that actually uses a different technology. It's a small molecule or a pill for a type of breast cancer. So it took us 13 years from incorporation in 1997 to get our first drug approved. It took 8 more until our second drug was approved, and then another year till our third drug was approved just last year. You know, it's expensive and it takes a long time, but we're not daunted by that challenge. We're expanding and growing, and actually we are hiring hundreds of scientists and professionals, both here in Snohomish County at our headquarters in Bothell, but also around the world as we expand into Europe and other territories. You know, patients with cancer need new therapies and better treatments. And my colleagues at Seagen and I are working here in Snohomish County, where we innovate every day to try to bring highly effective therapies to those patients. So I'm excited to share any other information you may be interested in about Seagen and the great work that we're doing here in your community. It's a wonderful place to work, and we're really proud to be part of the community here.
Nancy, thank you so much. And I'm going to brag for a moment. And first of all, God love you and giving us a science lesson. You are amazing. Don't anyone feel daunted by what you just heard. The important thing to know is if you listened, how long it took for the first drug, how long, but much shorter, it took for the second drug, and the third drug was a year. I want you to know that Seagen, which some of you may still know in your mind as Seattle Genetics, that they were just identified as on the list of globally of the 10 most innovative biotechnology pharmaceutical companies in the world. And they came in at number 4. They didn't come in at the bottom of the list and work their way up. That's what 2 decades of determination by Clay Segal and his amazing team have brought us. And I just want to also add, people know the name Genentech, which is now owned by Roche. And not that I'm trying to put any pressure on Nancy, but I grew up in the Bay Area, and I remember when Genentech was a baby company. I remember when people were having huge arguments about what the Cohen-Boyer patents meant and whether there was a there. And we forget that the companies that now are the giants, most of them started out small if they started with an innovation. So we are enormously proud of what your company has accomplished. Similarly, Rich, incredible. And Chris, now we're going to hear the story of what has happened with Juno. Also interesting, the BMS influence in our region has been pretty substantial, clearly.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you for Nancy, and thank you, Richard. So hello, folks. My name's Chris Holt. I'm site head here at the BMS manufacturing site in Bothell. BMS, or Bristol-Myers Squibb, has 30,000 employees globally, but we've got about 1,500 in the greater Seattle area. As Leslie said, we were originally known as Juno. So Juno was founded in 2013. And it was a combination of some great science coming out of St. Jude's, the Hutch, Seattle Children's Hospital, and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So it's very much a super successful Seattle area success story, because BMS's cell therapy franchise is based here. It's been grown here, and it's all about Seattle, to be quite honest with you. We like Nancy and Richard, so we've got I suppose the privilege and the responsibility of transforming patients' lives through science. In particular for BMS, it's through the development and commercialization of personalized cell therapies. So it's, for want of a better word, it's kind of the next big thing in terms of the biotech and the life sciences frontier. And there's a handful of products that are now commercially authorized by the agency, the FDA, of which we've just had one authorized in February, which is known as Breyanzi, and one in March, which is known as Abecma, which is manufactured by a sister site on the East Coast. So we've got 1,000 people downtown in kind of the Lake Union area. I think they're dotted on the west side and the east side. And this is the engine that drives BMS's global cell therapy operations for the United States and internationally as well. So it's driven, all the energy and the science is coming out of the Seattle area. Here in Bothell and Canyon Park, we've got 500 folks on site. And what we do is we do the clinical trial manufacturing and the commercial manufacturing for Breyanzi, which I mentioned is the first CAR T or cell therapy product that's recently been approved to treat B-cell lymphoma, which is, it's a type of blood cancer that inhibits the body's immune system and the white blood cell capability. So it was discovered, developed, and commercialized all here in the Pacific Northwest. So very, very proud of that from a regional perspective, and also obviously the impact it's having on patients who aren't in good shape at all. It's a third-line therapy. So typically speaking, they've tried radiotherapy, they've tried chemotherapy, and those haven't worked, unfortunately. So that's when a product like Breyanzi kind of steps in. So to give you just a little bit of background to kind of what a cell therapy does, an autologous cell therapy in particular. So
Chris,
as Nancy kind of mentioned, cancer is elusive and it tends to be invisible to the body's immune system. So your white blood cells that normally detect that there's a problem don't see the cancer cells. And so what CAR T therapy in particular does, it weaponizes the body's white blood cells, and it induces a change whereby they can recognize and they can attack the cancer cells in the body. Yeah, and it's done so on a patient by patient perspective. So we get material from a patient, it comes in, we do a number of manipulations, we alter the cells so that they can recognize the cancer, and 21 days, 22 days later, we reinfuse the patient's material back into them, and it attacks the cancer. So that's very high level what we do here in Bothell, and I hope that gave you a little bit of insight in terms of BMS's operations and science here in the Bothell and Seattle area.
that was great.
Thank you.
All of those were great. And I hope that gives you an idea of the incredible, amazing innovation that's taking place in this area. Matt, when we had been planning for this, you had said, so what's the connection between Seattle and Bothell? And I think you've heard some pretty strong examples of that, particularly in our last two speakers, which is all of that basic science research that the federal government, as well as the institutions and companies themselves, are funding. It takes a long time, and it's really done within the university, our universities and our research institutes. And what we're hearing is that combination also of research institutes from around the country and around the world that collaborate and are bringing together different technologies and science on which a company can be created and built. One of the first was Juno, in that sort of sense of three or four different research institutes. I can name easily, I won't because we don't have time, but 10 companies in the last 2 to 3 years that are similarly, there's a presence in Vancouver, there's a presence in San Francisco, but the company is headquartered in Seattle, or it's Boston and it's San Diego and Seattle. Is you're seeing that type of clustering of research, and then In Bothell and surrounds in Redmond, we're seeing Just Evotech, which has its science that's spun out of Amgen. It's a whole team that came out of Amgen, created a company. They're doing a lot of their initial work is being done in the same building as the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle. But when it comes to hiring hundreds of people to do the manufacturing, they're doing that in Redmond. They're building their facility there. We're doing the manufacturing. We're thrilled, Nancy, that CGen is planning to do its commercial scale manufacturing in the region. That doesn't mean only in the region, but what we're seeing now is a completely different level of companies that are feeding in and saying it's too expensive in Seattle. Let's just be honest. Not only is there not enough space, if there were, the tax structure is different. The decisions that you have to make as business leaders on where you go are profound. And certainly cost of doing business, quality of life, being able to attract and retain workers. Tell us a little bit about how you're looking at the region in terms of attracting talent. What I know that our new dean of the School of STEM at UW Bothell, Leslie Cornick, Dean Cornick, is in this group today and thinks all day long about how she's going to prepare workers for our industry and beyond. Is how's that going for you? What do you need? How are you looking at things in the area? And Nancy, why don't you start, and then Rich and Chris.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're growing. We have always been growing. Actually, I can't even remember a time since I joined the company 14 years ago where we haven't been hiring. We've been on a really remarkable growth curve. We have a challenge attracting talent. We have to grow our own talent here, and we do a lot of that. We pull people out of the University of Washington and other, WSU and other higher ed, and we train them across all, whether they be benchtop scientists, manufacturing folks, we bring chemical engineers from the University of Washington in and train them to do parts of our manufacturing, biostatisticians, computer programmers, and physicians, clearly a lot of physicians and healthcare providers. And so like the Hutch and the University of Washington have actually been very fertile grounds for the early stages of our company to recruit out of. As we've grown into a commercial entity, we've needed a different group of people. We need people who are, who have experience in sales and marketing. And those folks, and then our growth has just grown so significantly that, the universities and the groups here can't supply all of the talent that we need. So we have done a lot of recruiting from out of state. A lot of people from the Bay Area have moved up here because of often challenges with the cost of housing in the Bay Area and with, frankly, the lack of income tax in Washington state has been an attractive driver for folks to relocate from California, but also people from Massachusetts and New Jersey. What we're seeing now actually is a good thing and also a bad thing, is that we have become the company that people locally poach out of. So as you mentioned, Leslie, there's a bunch of newer we call them baby biotechs, but smaller companies. There's companies called Silverback, Chinook, Neolucan, OncoResponse, just to name a few, Juno, stolen some people from us. And so we end up being now the feeder company that that our folks will, come work for us for 5-10 years, get great experience, and then go out and seed the new companies. And while that's, not the greatest for us, it's great for the environment, it's great for the region, the ecosystem, as you like to say, Leslie, and it's helping to make this a much more attractive and growing place when it's not just one big company, but multiple companies. Really kind of helps with the vibrancy. And so we're excited that that's happening actually. But definitely attraction of talent is a challenge. And then of course, I'll stop now and let Rich speak because I know he's had similar challenges, and probably Chris as well. But, keeping the competitive advantages that we have, the favorable tax environment that we have compared to other places, the, great quality of life, We have challenges with affordable housing, you know, making sure that we don't lose the things that have made us attractive in the future is very important to us.
Excellent. Rich?
Well said. And I'll build on a few things because there are some subtle differences between kind of the medical device and the biotech spaces that we live in. And like Nancy said, you know, especially I talked about us being a startup in 1998. We're more of a mid-sized company at this point in time. So we do focus a lot internally on what do we need to do to engage and not only attract, but also retain our top talent. And we've seen that some of those initiatives have really helped us retain our top talent, but also the fact that what we do is incredibly meaningful. I think that helps us attract new talent because as we, you know, even as we take a look at this horrible pandemic that hopefully we're coming out of soon, you know, last year we saw that point of care ultrasound, the demand spiked during the COVID pandemic because what we found out on a global basis is it's very quick to use. You're able to not only scan the lungs, but the entire chest region where COVID can attack. It's very, you can take the ultrasound to the patient. You don't need to take the patient to a CT scanner or an X-ray. You don't have to disinfect. Can you imagine how long it takes it's about 45 minutes to disinfect a large CT scan. So we've seen some, you know, so I don't necessarily love why our business spiked last year, but I am really proud of the fact that when we had a medical emergency like COVID, we were there and we were able to help on a global basis, take care of millions and millions of patients. So I think our team, we've messaged that, our team worked 24/7 through the pandemic. They were incredible. And I think that having the pride in what we do is really important. That is a great way for us to continue to recruit and retain because what we do matters. And this is we talked about this being a global business and being mid-sized. It is also nice to have the ability to have jobs that are broader. You know, I mentioned I worked at a larger company where maybe you have more specific and deeper jobs, but being in a company this size allows you to really own a lot. And I do think the top employees really appreciate that. So we are constantly working on fighting, especially when it comes to high-tech jobs. And I'll just, you know, I've mentioned before, software engineers, you know, if we don't, we compete with everybody from end to end, from Amazon, Microsoft, Google, you name it. Everyone seems to have. So there are different roles that are tougher than others, but I do think that having a lot of pride in making a difference is incredible, and being a part of this overall ecosystem life science ecosystem is very important for us.
Fantastic. Hey, Chris, I know that you've got perspectives from two companies, right? From AGC Biologics, which is also a very fast-growing and international contract development and manufacturing organization, and now with BMS. And what are your thoughts about all of this in terms of workforce, recruiting people, the talent?
Things are hotting up, aren't they? I think there's a lot of investment and growth in especially in the Bothell area. We went through an aggressive growth phase here at BMS in 2018, 2019. We're stabilizing a little bit. Nancy's growing, Richard's growing, and I know that there's a number. So AGC, Lyle, Just, they're all growing in the area as well. So there's a lot of demand. Yeah. So yes, we're kind of poaching folks off each other, and you'll see this. And for me, it's a sign of a developing market or a maturing market, because you'll see it in the Massachusetts area, you'll see it in North Carolina, you'll see it in Jersey, you'll see it in San Diego and San Francisco. You start getting a little bit of a merry-go-round, which is actually ultimately a good thing, because the business and the amount of work in the area is enough to justify that you can do that. So we're growing ourselves as a hub. That's the good news, yeah. But in order to fuel that growth, It's about bringing talent in locally, nationally, and internationally. So you can tell from my accent, I'm not from the United States. So BMS, we have to bring talent in from Europe, from the Far East, from a number of different nations, from South America as well, and also across the United States. So I think all three of us are probably in that national and international kind of talent market. But the folks who really drive manufacturing operations tend to be more local. And as Nancy mentioned, we have to identify, we have to hire, and we have to grow this talent. Because ultimately, over the next 5 years, if you want to double the number of people in biotech in the Bothell area, then we have to grow them. So it's partnerships with businesses who might be struggling a little bit, such as Boeing. They're obviously going through some resizing at the moment. It's partnerships with education establishments such as Shoreline, etc. And it's getting folks out of, whether it's high school, whether it's UW or similar, or and basically just showing folks that there's a career within biotech and within medical devices, and getting them on that conveyor belt. Yeah, training them the skills, making them understand GMP, understand how the development process goes. The other important thing is you don't need to be a scientist to be in pharmaceuticals. That's really key. There's, as I think Richard hinted, is that we have obviously science behind what we do, whether it's from biological sciences for me and Nancy, or whether it's some of the more electronic sciences and software sciences for Richard. But we need engineers, to run the facilities and run the equipment. We need accountants, we need HR professionals, we need purchasing professionals, and we need manufacturing associates. And manufacturing associates, to be honest with you, can come from any background. You just need to be basically have a good work ethic, be able to work as a team, be able to operate safely, because we can teach the rest. So a lot of the skill sets overlap, but the main thing is we have to build our workforces, we have to train, we have to develop. And people get amazing careers out of working in the pharmaceutical sector. You travel internationally, you work with fantastic people, and you have the privilege of helping the patients solve significant healthcare issues that they have, which is the cherry on the cake.
Yeah, listening to that comment about, is it good or bad when we've reached that level of maturity where people are competing with each other for the same pool of talent? And that was really the North Carolina story from 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How did they become really the top place in the country when it comes to manufacturing, the biomanufacturing side? And really that was is that they realized they couldn't do it anymore. The companies, which so many of the big pharmas were there doing some, whether it was fill finish or doing actual small molecules at the time, moving into biologics, is they finally just put their foot down and said, we're tired of driving up the cost of labor. We love every single thing about North Carolina except that, and we're not going to expand here anymore. Yep. So they kind of put their foot down together with the state. And the state is a more economic development driven place. So they created their way out of it through major workforce programs from K-12 all the way up through PhDs. What do you think we should be doing here that we're not? And that's one question. Another thing I'm really interested in, it's the awareness factor. Because I suspect if we were using the polling function right now on Zoom, I'd be asking our audience, how many of you have children and are wondering what they're going to do for their jobs? And how many of you realize that off the freeway, if you go, not in the morning, not too late, Rich will tell you the exact times you may come and go, that how many of you realize what incredible future employers are there and sources of internships, right? Sources of opportunities to gain exposure, because I think there's a real lack of awareness that I find stunning about what those opportunities are that are exploding in Bothell and Redmond and Issaquah and surrounds.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct, Leslie. I mean, even if I just think of myself, I'm a pharmacist by training. and I did my PharmD at the University of Washington. And I had no idea that I could have this career in drug development, even as I did my doctoral level degree in pharmacology in my PharmD. It wasn't until after I'd been working for a couple of years at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance that I realized, oh, I could do this, and moved into the field. And so that's one of the reasons why I lecture every year, and many of my colleagues lecture at the School of Pharmacy at the University of Washington, to help folks understand that there's a lot of other opportunities. So that's with first year PharmD students. And many of us, I know, give back and do conversations. Our groups have done stuff with Shoreline Community College and other community colleges to help people understand that, you know, of course, there's the normal degrees people think about. I'll be a physician, I'll be a nurse, I'll be a pharmacist, I'll be an engineer. But there's so much more beyond that that people can access. And it's just a matter of understanding and learning. And that's a partnership, right? We need to go out there and talk to folks like you on this call to help you understand and help more people understand the great opportunities in life sciences that exist here, but also, you know, to make sure that you know, our high school students and our college students understand that there's a whole new career, you know, that's here in this region that people can access, and it can be incredibly fulfilling. I mean, there's a wonderful TED Talk, if anyone's seen it, with a guy named Dan Pink, who talks about the 3 things that motivate people, right? It's not money, it's not prestige, it's autonomy, mastery, and sense of purpose. And I can tell you, working in life sciences, you can't get much more sense of purpose than what we do here every day. Whether you're, you know, the chief executive, the benchtop scientist, the manufacturing associate, and even the accounting and payroll person, every single person who works at CGen, and I know it's the same for Sonosite and for BMS, is a part of the team that creates these life-saving technologies. And so again, I think that sense of purpose is just something that's really, you know, personally motivating, and I know motivates, you know, all of my colleagues at our company.
Nancy, thank you. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I wish we had just,
Yeah.
I need to snip that out of the video because I don't think that could be better said.
Yeah, can I build on that real quick?
Sure.
Just I completely agree. It's so exciting to be a part of, you know, this life science corridor here, but also, Leslie, I can't remember how many new companies, you know, startups there were this past year, and how much capital is being poured into new companies. Nancy touched on that earlier, but it's also an opportunity for everything from, you know, well-established, larger company. But if you know, you or you talk about opportunities for kids, wow, startups, small companies, well-established, but all very strong, mission-driven, impactful organizations.
Chris, what are you thinking?
I think the onus is on us as the companies to do outreach. I think kind of Nancy hinted at that, and she's already done it. When I was in North Carolina, I did some stuff there with NC State and ECU, East Carolina University. So open invite to anybody around the table, whether it's high schools, whether it's a college, whether it's a university. That yeah, it'd be absolute pleasure to kind of sit down in front of some students and just talk them through what a career in the pharmaceutical industry looks like. I've done it before, and it'd be a pleasure to do it with you guys. So open invite.
Thank you. So this is something, of course, at Life Science Washington, we have made a top priority for the last few years. And you can hear there's opportunity at every level to engage with students and to motivate them. And I think we know the younger we get to them, the greater the chances are that they'll give our industry a good look. Demographics are against us. Right now, as an industry, we're competing globally for the same talent. By the time people are ready or at that choosing their career, it might be as they're finishing high school, is figuring out how we are making them aware and showing them, as you said, Nancy, it's every one of the jobs. And all of you have said, it's not just the scientists or the engineers and the computer scientists. right? One of the things for all of you who are listening to understand what's driving our area, all that big tech combined with all this life science research is what we call convergence. I can tell you for decades, our industry has talked about, oh, when biological sciences and computers converge, it'll be amazing. We are now absolutely at the pinnacle of that. And we are in the area where all the big cloud computing companies are based, where partnerships are being forged by companies like Adaptive Biotechnologies and Microsoft, right? To actually finally have the horsepower to sequence the entire human adaptive immune system, which just, it's a staggering amount of data. We need people who can work in environments, whether they are there answering the phones and welcoming people into the company, or they are there doing artificial intelligence and machine learning to create the next generation of products. We have it all in this region. And I encourage everybody, I know that it's 9:26 and we're really coming to near the close of this session, is we want to engage with you, whatever it is, your role, whatever it was that interested you in attending this session. If you have children in your own family or that you are exposed to in your life, please encourage them to take a look at what is surrounding them, to take them off the freeway and go drive around, and you will find little tiny baby startups. Thank you to spinning those out and helping to finance those as well. The success of these companies has driven capital into our region to keep investing in the next generation of companies. Is that we're really, we're in a renaissance period in this region, and we just need to keep our foot on the gas and keep going. So I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to turn it back over to Gary. Gary, is there anything you want to say to close out the session?
Thank you very much, Leslie, and our panelists. This was an amazing presentation and conversation. Really thought-provoking and exciting to know that we have an industry here that is thriving and permeating the greater Seattle, Snohomish County realm. And I really think you all did an amazing job. So really want to thank you for that. Now, I'd like to say that we have another coffee chat coming up. So developing your workforce will be May 11th. And again, at 8:30 a.m., bring your coffee drinks if you have them. And just remember that we also have 2 in the same week. So Snohomish County Update, which is very important and will be very interesting to hear. We're going to have that presentation as well. And that's going to be our coffee chat webinar, actually, May 13th. And that's going to be from 12 noon to 1 p.m. I want to thank Leslie, Richard, Nancy, and Chris for their amazing presentation. And again, folks, remember, Economic Alliance, Snohomish County, advocate, develop, and connect. I wish you all a great day and enjoy yourselves. Take care.
Thanks, folks. Take care.
Thank you.